To introduce this closing session on our third day of the LSIW 2022. I'm pleased to welcome Gehlkopf and Shaneera Rasqué, the two ESG coordinators at CSSF. So this closing session will consist in two parts. We will have an interview first with Laura and Shaneera, and then we will have a presentation from FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. So please join me in welcoming Laura and Shaneera from CSSF. So Laura has endorsed in May the role of ESG coordinator at the CSSF. Laura is in charge of coordinating and monitoring the topic of sustainable finance for the CSSF. Shaneera is the ESG coordinator for investment funds within the CSSF. And prior to join the CSSF in 2018, Shaneera was conducting officer in charge of risk management in a Luxembourg-based Supermanco. So given your roles are quite new at the CSSF, would you mind, Laura and Shaneera, to introduce yourself and to explain us what are exactly your key roles at the CSSF?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So as you said, I'm the ESG coordinator for the CSSF, and I think all your participants here during the week have understood that sustainable finance is a cross-cutting subject, and it's very impactful on a lot of different subjects. And so the role as the ESG coordinator is to ensure that we at the CSSF have a cohesive implementation across all sectors. I also advise the management of the CSSF on strategic projects. I mean, as the regulator, we have a key role to play in the implementation of the sustainable framework. And I think everyone is aware of that. And one of our priorities is to accompany the financial sectors in this implementation. And so as an ESG coordinator in my function, I have to collaborate transversely with all our experts. So we have Shaneera, who is the ESG coordinator for the OPC UCI side, but I will also coordinate with the bank side, all the departments at the CSSF that are impacted by this ESG framework. And that's my role.
Thank you. A challenging role, huh, Laura? And you, Shaneera?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'll start by mentioning that the CSSF, the METI-OPC within the CSSF has set up a dedicated task force to ESG, so bringing together experts representing the whole value chain of the fund industry. And my role principally is to coordinate this task force in order to have a convergent and comprehensive approach to the implementation and supervision of the sustainability rules and how they are being implemented by our supervised entities. We know how much convergence is absolutely fundamental, considering as well the importance of a Luxembourg investment fund sector. And this demonstrates as well how much sustainable finance is standing top of the agenda of the CSF. I also sit on various international committees, like for ESMA or IOSCO, which are tackling the ESG subject, and we define positions again in close collaboration with the experts from the METI-OPC.
Exactly. So thank you, Shaneera. So how does this fit in with the work that is being undertaken regarding regulatory supervisory convergence at ESMA, as well as in the international sphere, as IOSCO, for example?
The first thing is that the CSF is an active contributor in those international fora. I can mention ESMA, IOSCO. So we are part of those policy groups which are promoting supervisory convergence in the area of asset management, and also helping to define the single EU rulebook for financial markets. Focusing on IOSCO, we're also actively contributing to the work which is being done by IOSCO, which is a global standard setter for securities, for the securities market. And we are also, as the CSF, endeavoring to implement the recommendations which are regularly issued by IOSCO in the asset management industry.
Thank you.
And we also active at ESMA level. And I mean, As Shaneera already mentioned, there's a number of initiatives at international level, at European level, that we actively contribute to. And also one of the key roles of the coordinators in that respect is to ensure the circulation of information, because there's a lot of initiatives at the moment, and it's really important to share the knowledge and expertise that we gain from this participation within our experts, with the industry, when we are able to. It's a very important source of information also to have this.
Yeah, quite critical and key, indeed. Thank you. Shaneera, we are also aware that the CSSF expects to receive the updated pre-contractual documents of UCITS and IEFs in accordance with the provision of the SFDR RTS by end of October at the latest. Everyone is deeply involved in that at the moment. Are there any aspects of that filing that you would like to highlight to the audience?
Yeah, just a bit of context first. The CSSF has issued end of July 2022 a communication with this regard in terms of filing of pre-contractual and periodic disclosure templates and update of prospectuses and annual reports. This communique actually sets out expectations, supervisory expectations, and also provides with details on what we expect in terms of filing. This communication has been complemented in September with an additional information of the confirmation we are also awaiting in this regard. And if I want to highlight some points, first thing is that in terms of pre-contractual filing, this is not a fast-track procedure. So we will challenge the comprehensiveness of the disclosures with regard to the overarching investment strategy. This will be reviewed with regards to the level 1 and level 2 text of SFDR, and also with the principles which are set out in the supervisory briefing on sustainability risk and disclosures, which has been issued by ESMA in May 2022. We agree that this supervisory briefing is mostly meant to NCAs and provide guidelines on how to supervise the sustainability risk disclosures, but it also provides important principles as well to financial market participants. I can name, for instance, the presentation of disclosures, or I can refer to the naming convention. As well, going beyond the qualitative aspect, there's also a challenging of the quantitative aspect. So we will look at the figures in terms of minimum sustainable investments. We will look at the figures in terms of taxonomy alignment as well. And we will expect that those are really comprehensive with regards to the investment strategy. To end on that point, I think, as usual, we expect the sustainability disclosures to be fair, not misleading, and clear to investors, and that there should be an adequate transparency as well in the pre-contractual disclosures. And at the very end of the value chain, of course, we're expecting fund manager to keep the promise of what they are selling to investors.
Thank you. Laura, regarding greenwashing, this is at the moment also a hot topic. You mentioned in previous papers and interviews the concept of sustainability by design and its importance when it comes to combat greenwashing. Can you take us through that and how that frames the CSSF supervision of financial market participants and financial products, please?
Yes, I will try to do that. I mean, we've all seen with the development of the regulatory framework, there's been an increase in demand for sustainability features and products in general. And at the same time, we're also aware that there is great importance that investors who are seeking these sustainability features can trust the framework and keep trust in the financial products that are being offered, because you don't want to lose that opportunity to really leverage on the finance to make an impact on the planet. And you can see in the regulatory framework that to try and achieve this, we are required to integrate ESG factors in all aspects of the existing system, which is why sustainable finance is so transversal and cross-cutting. And And that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about sustainability by design. It's not a matter of compliance, or not only a matter of compliance, it's a matter of integrating all those criteria into what we do, into the existing process, existing organization. And I had an interesting conversation with some experts in the field beforehand about even just the term sustainable finance, because the conversation was about how the term could mean that you have on the one side sustainable finance and on the other side, as opposed to it, traditional finance. That's not the goal here. The goal is to have a financial system that is throughout sustainable. And that's what I mean by sustainability by design. And I think it also makes sense when you think about greenwashing, because greenwashing, there can be so many instances. It can appear in so many different points of the value chain that you can't really have one tool that is specifically targeted at fighting greenwashing. You have to fight it from all these different aspects. And yeah, that's for now, that's the approach, is to integrate ESG in all organizations, all aspects, and we're doing the same at the CSSF, so we're integrating the ESG factors in our supervision tools. It's not that we're going to design a new specifically dedicated tool, but we will integrate this in our supervision off-site, on-site tools that we already have.
That is excellent, I think. Yeah. It's going to the right direction. So, Shaneera, also you, in a previous Paper Jam interview, you noted the ESMA supervisory briefing, sustainability risk and disclosure in the area of investment management. That was issued at the end of May. This is quite a comprehensive document, you will agree. Is there a message you would like to give to the asset management industry in regard to this briefing, and in particular regarding the periodic disclosure obligations under Article 11 of the SFDR, especially considering that asset managers will be starting in the next weeks to prepare the first annual reports of the investment funds they manage?
Yeah, I think the first thing to understand is where does the supervisory briefing come through. The supervisory briefing is a practical tool which is used by ESMA to achieve supervisory convergence. And the main objective of its supervisory briefing, as I said before, is to provide NCA's guidance for the supervision of the integration of sustainability risk and disclosure by fund managers. But still, it covers a large spectrum of subjects like periodic and pre-contractual presentation of periodic and pre-contractual information, the consistency in fund documentation and marketing material, website disclosures, naming conventions. And considering that, we would expect that financial market participants in the pre-contractual and periodic filing would take due account of the principles which are actually set out in the briefing. Now, if I now focus on the periodic part, as from 1st of January 2023, it is expected that financial market participants would comply with the mandatory disclosure requirements which are set out under the SFDR as from for any annual report which is issued as from that date. What I would like as well to add on the supervisory briefing, this is not the end of a story. There are still changes there might be upcoming changes. There are discussions at the moment at the European level on some aspects of the supervisory briefing. And I think it's important as well to mention that there's a common supervisory action which is in the course of discussion at ESMA level in the asset management industry, focusing really on the sustainability disclosures and the integration of sustainability risk by financial market participants. This common supervisory action will happen very fast. It's foreseen to start in Q3 to 2023 at the moment. That's the latest information we have. But it's a deep compliance check on how much the financial market participants are actually in compliance with the regulation as such. So I think it's important as well to keep in mind that the supervisory briefing will come into play when this common supervisory action will also take place for our industry.
Okay, so more to follow on.
Much more to follow, I would say.
To do, yeah, also. Thank you. So Laura, again, another challenge for both the industry and the supervisor has been the speed at which a regulatory framework supporting the EU Green Deal has been developed and executed. At light speed, we could say. SFDR and regulated regulation has brought fundamental changes to financial market participants in terms of integrating ESG into the investment process. How important is education, and what are the CSSF expectations of the industry in respect of education within the supervised entities?
I mean, one can only agree that the regulatory framework is moving quickly. It's true. It's a fast-paced implementation. I think 2023 is still going to be as fast-paced. And it impacts how we conduct the business, how we design products, how we think about gathering data. So there is, again, this transversal aspect of how everything is moving forward, and it's moving forward quickly. And the market can only get ready or be ready to face those challenges that are upcoming if they start the preparations now, and they should have already started. And a major pillar of this preparation is obviously its education. When we're talking about sustainability by design and the fact that you need to integrate ESG in all your processes, it means also adequate training, upskilling of staff. There is an obligation, for instance, for IFM and UCITS to retain appropriate resources to be able to implement their strategy. If they're starting to design specific sustainability strategy, it makes sense that they provide an education framework or training program for the staff that will allow them to understand and implement that strategy. So yes, I think education it's a major aspect. It's not only a major aspect for integration within an organization, it's also, I think, a major aspect for the role of market players towards educating the public. We talked about how it's necessary for investors to have this trust in the sustainable finance framework. And I think depending on the different actors, they can play also a role in helping the public, retail investor notably, understand the framework. And as you know, the CSSF, we've taken initiatives in terms of financial education. And recently, we published the results of a survey that we did conjointly with ABBL and LSFE. And they've shown that there is an interest of the public in general for sustainable finance, but there is also a lack of understanding. And you could take as an example also, the MiFID requirements to take into account a sustainable finance preference of clients. And you can imagine that someone who acts as an investment advisor will also need the education to be able to explain and translate this to their clients so that they're able to, meet this requirement properly. So for me, it's very, very apparent that the expectations, whether internally or externally, can only be met when there is a major focus on education and upskilling.
Thank you. Yeah, also quite critical. It has also to happen at the same speed, probably.
Yeah, and when you design this sort of programs, we're doing it at the CSSF also. We're trying to upskill all of our agents. You also have to make sure that it's adapted and targeted differently depending on the role of the staff. Obviously, if you're a senior management, you're not going to have the same education needs or training needs than someone who's a risk manager or an investment advisor.
Sure. Shaneera, While the deadline of the 1st of January 2023 is quickly approaching for the implementation of the SFDR RTS, there are still some outstanding questions. For example, that ESMA has asked the EU Commission to clarify. What is your advice to the industry in light of these open questions?
I think the first thing we need to mention is that we acknowledge that there are still questions, and probably some more important than others to be answered, like, for example, the definition of thresholds to disclose under Article 8 and Article 9 under SFDR. Those are fundamental questions which are still under discussion. There are also a set of questions which are currently with the ESAs, and also a set of questions which have been forwarded to the Commission. We know that the workability of a sustainable finance rulebook needs to be enhanced, but at the same time, we also know that the regulation is nascent, it's new, and that there will be evolutions and iterations. This is obvious. This is the beginning of a journey. It will be a long one, but we're just at the beginning of a journey. Our expectation vis-à-vis the industry in the meantime is that we do comply with the existing rules. Should there be changes, they need to be operated in due time. But our main priority is that we are in compliance with the current regulatory framework as it stands today.
Thank you. Laura,
yeah, and I agree with what Shaneera just said, and I'm a jurist, so I'm never going to say compliance is not important. Maybe we can also outline the fact that, yes, there is some outstanding questions. We still have to move forward, even though there's some outstanding questions. But there is also a real opportunity for best practice to arise while these questions are still outstanding. And as Shaneera said very rightly, it's the beginning of the process. We will have other outstanding questions that will appear during the course of implementation over the next 5-10 years. But in the meantime, there's a real opportunity, especially with the level of expertise here in Luxembourg, for best practice to arise and anticipate these potential issues.
If I may just add, Isabelle, is that we are working currently within the Météo PC on an ESG FAQ as well, which will address actually questions related to the Luxembourg industry as such. So we are working hard towards actually providing with this FAQ as soon as possible.
Okay, this will be, I think, extremely useful. Very much welcome for the industry. Lara, now we understand that ESG and sustainable finance is not about ticking the boxes. You will agree. You also mentioned that previously. What is your view?
Well, I think, yeah, my view on this has been transparent from the conversation we just had. What is important the takeaway is that the CSSF, we're aware that this is not going to happen overnight. We're aware that there is some outstanding questions. But I do believe that if as an organization, us all together as stakeholders, we keep in mind what the goal is, there is a path to be found in this. And I mean, by all means, I'm not advocating for additional or complex layers of regulation. I think the framework is complex as it is, but by integrating ESG into traditional governance, the tools that we already have, risk management process, remuneration policies, valuation policies, we will be steering a real transition of the financial sector. And I do believe we can achieve this through governance, through best practice.
That's really good to hear. That's a message of hope. Shaneera, something you want to add in that regard?
No, I totally agree with what Laura has just said.
Thank you. This is really great too, that the CSSF is also believing in that sustainable finance framework, and that we are all thinking that will support a sustainable transition. So I would like now to see if there are any general questions from the audience.
I just have, well, it's, I would say, a specific question for investment funds. So when we have a financial market participant that takes into account PIEs at its own level,
It's getting technical already.
So exactly.
Just mention general question as possible. As
No,
much
I
as
think
possible.
it's quite. I think it can be an easy one. So we agree that if the financial market participant takes into account PIEs at its own level, it is possible that its products are not taking it into account, and this should be explained.
I think this has been clarified in the ESA clarification as well, which have just been published. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
But that was not an easy one.
Any other question? I'm waiting if we have questions from the online attendees. It seems we don't have some, so.
I can have another one if you allow
You
me.
have the microphone.
Yes, exactly. I'm using it. For master feeder structures, the view of the CSSF is that the articles should be aligned, I assume.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part of the question.
For master feeder structures, for master feeder funds, the view of the CSSF is that the classification should be aligned. I mean, if the master is an Article 8, the feeder should be an Article 8 as well.
My view is that yes, it should be aligned, but that will be clarified as well. Quite
As well.
soon. Yeah.
Okay. And do you know by when we can expect to have the FAQ available?
We are working hard for it to be as soon as possible, but as I said, it won't relate to technical questions or calculation methodologies under the SFDR framework.
Okay.
It will really relate to the Luxembourgish framework as such.
It's actually not really a question. I just wanted to thank you both, Laura and Shaneera, and well done to the CSSF as well for creating your roles and you know, putting in the resource as well to you know, to obviously focus and work with the industry on such an important topic. So well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura, Shaneera, for joining us
Thank you.
at the
Thank you for having
LSIW.
us.
I think it was a good exercise for all of us to hear your guidance and your clarifications. So.
Yeah, I think we're all in this together. We're all stakeholders with a role to play in making this happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So
Thank you.
No, we just received questions from the chat, but it's a little bit late. Quite technical. And then we have the other also speaker waiting online. So, thank you. Yeah, if you prefer. Yeah, exactly. I will also do so. So I'm pleased now to go to the second part of the closing session. And we have the pleasure to introduce to you Lorraine Phillips, the Deputy Director on the Inclusive Rural Transformation Gender Equality Division at FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. So,
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
hi, Lorraine. Yes, we hear you and we see you. That's good to see you. So I'm glad you were able to participate. Unfortunately, you could not come over to Luxembourg because you're currently very busy in Rome, where FAO is headquartered. But that's very important that we hear your voice from the field for the closing of our LuxFLAG LSIW event. And that's the first time, I believe, also FAO is participating to such an event in Luxembourg. And this is also something we were very keen on behalf of the LuxFLAG team, and I believe also the Luxembourg community We are really pleased that we can hear some part of what FAO is doing, what in particular you're also doing in your division. And I will just briefly introduce FAO for the one that may not know, that UN organization, and also yourself before we start with your presentation. So FAO was, of course, created in 1945, and its goal mainly is to achieve the food security for all and make sure that people have regular access to enough high-quality food and to lead active, healthy lives within themselves. So now FAO has 195 members, and FAO works in over 130 countries worldwide, which is quite impressive. And Lorraine, you are so the Deputy Director of the Inclusive Rural Transformation and Gender Equality Division for FAO. You are an international political economist and an expert in inclusive development, global governance, development finance, and result-based management. Prior to join FAO in 2021, you worked almost 6 years in a variety of senior policy strategy and advisory roles at the UN organization IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agricultural Development. You also had a variety of private finance roles in London, in New York, and you hold a PhD in International Political Economy from the London School of Economics. So if we are technically ready, I will give you the floor, Lorraine. So please guide us through your work in the field. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and for inviting us. Can you still hear me?
We hear you, but we don't see you.
But you can't see me. Okay. Okay. I'm in the corner. Excellent. Okay. So thank you again. And I think this is an excellent opportunity to close this session, even though FAO, of course, has a very different mandate than the colleagues who were just speaking from regulatory perspective. But nonetheless, maybe I can give a sort of an overview of how we see rural finance and how we see green finance, ESG issues from an organization which has a mandate both on food security, as the introduction suggested, but also on poverty eradication. So to use the sort of a word that I know is often used in ESG, FAO is looking at pure plays, right, of investments which are really oriented towards being inclusive, being sustainable, and having as their sort of primary objective poverty eradication, food security, climate adaptation, etc. I actually have a slightly updated version of the presentation. I don't know if it's possible for me to share my screen, but if not, we can use this version. I'm not sure. Okay, I can't see the slides very well from here because I'm looking at your, like I'm seeing the room, but I will do my best. We can go to the next slide then. So I wanted to start by sort of giving an overview of things that are probably very familiar to all of you. But when we think about small scale finance or finance for the poorest people in the world, rural actors, rural finance, what are the sort of major themes, trends, and drivers that we see that are important to highlight? I think here, you know, we, from our perspective of people who don't work full-time in finance, like many of you, we think that it's fast evolving, but we know that innovations tend to trickle down, right, down to the poorest and to people in rural areas more slowly than they are done at the top, so in major investment markets. Nonetheless, some important innovations that influence the lives of the people that we work with are things like digitally enabled financial services. So you could imagine, for example, the importance of mobile money in reaching underserved communities in rural areas who don't have access to standard banking, to standard financial accounts, but also for people like women, young people who don't usually have, who never had access to financial services before these kind of digitally enabled services were available. And we also noticed that we have much more information. We can use big data and data analytics to understand better who is in need of finance, what the sort of where pockets are of poverty are and where there may be an underserved need for financial services. And we can use even sort of very advanced technology like satellite technology to see and map poverty and needs in terms of access to better financial services. I think that there's also, with a discussion around, not just agriculture or seeing agriculture as something old-fashioned and distinct, but looking at the fact that, agriculture is the sort of end of a system, right, which provides food for both rural and urban areas. There's a changing perception of the importance and the opportunities that we have to offer financial services for people in rural areas who are participating in these, what we call agri-food systems. So in the entire spectrum of services that bring food from sort of the field to the table. And I think also then to the point of the kind of work that LuxFLAG does and that you were just talking about, we also see opportunities to work with the financial sector because of the interest in investing in development challenges, so making more green financing options available, but also, of course, from the ESG perspective, working on the sustainability elements, working on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are a set of objectives that the United Nations has set out to achieve by 2030 in coordination with member states, private sector, etc. And finally, in terms of trends and drivers, we have more integrated risk management frameworks that allow for us to sort of offset the risks that working with small, poor producers in rural areas often presents, right? The lack of collateral and other things. We have new ways of measuring and offsetting risks, which are promising for reaching these underserved populations. If you can go to the next slide, please. Let me tell you a little bit about where we are, for those of you who are not familiar with the sort of financial opportunities in the agricultural and the agri-food system. There will be in the coming, say, 20 years, around 9 billion people to feed on the planet. And that presents a huge amount of challenges of having a food system which can provide food for that many people, that's also nutritious, that doesn't destroy the environment, that preserves, objectives around climate adaptation and climate mitigation. But the level of investment that the sector receives right now is very, very low. So, in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, agriculture is a major part of gross domestic product. It has some 60% of people are employed in agri-food systems, but it only receives 5% of lending. So it's a very underserved part of the economy in a number of countries, not only in Africa, of course, but also in other parts of the developing world, in Latin America and Asia. And we have statistics that suggest that only 30% of the demand that households have for finance is being met, which means that there's a huge upside and opportunity to provide more finance to these sorts of poor households that are working either in production or in processing, transport, in food systems. Now, where is the money coming from now? Most traditionally, it was coming from in community-based or informal financial organizations, 24%. But now the numbers are changing. So we have 43% from VC actors and around 30% from formal financial institutions. And I think another important statistic to keep in mind is that we have a sort of a dynamic and growing set of small and medium-sized enterprises working in agri-food systems. So a lot of young people are, innovating the way that agriculture is done in their countries. And there's very large youth populations in Africa and elsewhere. And many of those small and medium-sized enterprises are not getting the financing they need. So only 40% is accessing formal financial services. And if we look at the sort of longer term needs of financing governments and financing private sector objectives around sustainability, 98% of the demand is unmet. You can go to the next slide, please. So I think that, what we can see is that we have, these huge gaps. So to put some numbers on this, $150 billion annual gap for smallholder finance. Smallholders are people who are, managing, say, 1 to 2 hectares in most countries of land. And those people have small financing needs, but the financial sector is not available, it's not performing for them. And also those farmers who are at sort of very high risk to climate shocks, to natural disasters, to conflict-related shocks, are underserved by insurance markets. So in South Asia and in Southeast Asia, a higher percentage of people are covered, 20% of people are covered, rather than in Africa, where you only have a very low percentage coverage, less than 5%. And that's because governments have stepped in a number of countries to provide insurance. But a lot of the sort of innovation that are happening in insurance markets is not being translated down to meet the needs of these groups who are, personally offsetting a huge amount of risk related to climate change and other kinds of issues. And then you can see that there is a lot of disparity between regions and countries. You have, for example, countries where there's very large concentrations of poor people, like the Democratic Republic of Congo, where 4 out of 5 adults are not having any kind of access to financial services or insurance. And there's also a lot of statistics that show that this problem is particularly attenuated for women, who are more than half of the world's unbanked people, and around more than half of young people don't have an account. The only good news I could present, and I had a slide on this, but I added it myself, is that the gap, fortunately, between men and women's access to financial services is shrinking. So it's one good news story in development about the sort of access to resources for women, is that given the sort of innovations that I mentioned before, digital innovations, women are more able to access finance than they could previously. Next slide, please. So I wanted to say something in particular about the intersection between these kinds of issues that I've been talking about poverty, lack of financial services for the poorest, and what the climate smart and green finance movement energy could add or is missing in terms of reaching these people. Unfortunately, what we found is that, despite the fact that a third of GDP is covered and providing by agriculture and agri-food systems, and that there is 40% of people depending on these systems, you can go to the next slide. There's a real dearth of finance flowing towards this part of the agricultural value chain. So there's been a growth in the amount of money that's going to agriculture. So it's been up more than 30% over the past, say, 10 years. It's expected to grow. But I think at the moment we can see that the allocation of green bonds that are being issued, for example, are more heavily focused on energy and transport and less focused on agriculture or forest, natural resources, and land use. I think there's still scope for this to grow and for this money to move down the chain. If we look, for example, at what the Green Climate Fund is financing in terms of needs for climate mitigation and adaptation in developing countries, we can see that almost half is related to agriculture or to rural development, agri-food systems more broadly. But that a lot of this money is short-term. And if you can go to the next slide. Only 1.7% of this money is actually getting down to the people that I started talking about, who are the poorest, despite the fact that they are the ones, as I mentioned, who are bearing the brunt already of climate change and who hold the risk of climate change. They represent 85% of the sector, but they are not receiving the money. Most of the money from private impact investing on green finance or ESG finance actually goes to slightly richer countries, still developing countries, but not to the poorest countries. So we distinguish, for example, between a country like Brazil or Mexico on the one hand, which is a middle income country, and a country like that we mentioned before, Pakistan or the Democratic Republic of Congo, which are low income countries, and those countries are not accessing a huge amount of money. So I think that there's a lot of gaps that the industry and governments and institutions like FAO and others could start to fill together. If you go to the next slide, please. What could help, drive better access? I think Some of the things that the colleagues were speaking about before, about having good frameworks for policies, ensuring that there are high environmental standards, that developing countries can report on the finance that flows towards them for green finance or from ESG finance. And that, you know, we can sort of raise awareness about the gaps that I've mentioned, and also reassure investors that some of the risks can be offset and that there are adequate reporting and disclosure mechanisms in place to encourage investment in the areas of the world that I've just spoken about. Next slide, please. You can actually skip this. That's fine. Thank you. So just to close, I'd like to just say FAO's role is sort of a policy-oriented agency, a normative agency, and our team is working on making available research, data, and doing sort of advocacy and policy work that address the sort of constraints to the access to financial markets in rural areas. We're looking at the micro, meso, and macro levels. We're taking a sort of a holistic approach to understand how finance for rural development, for climate change is reaching or lacking reaching the kinds of people that we've talked about. We focus on ensuring that financial investments are inclusive so that they include the poorest, small and medium-sized enterprises, young people and women, also other marginalized groups, that we can, you know, advocate for and help countries to attract more green financing for their own objectives around transforming their economies and their food systems, and that we can help to de-risk and unlock finance by, you know, ensuring that there are early stage investments or first loss capital, or that we can help people access insurance that they need. And finally, I think another really important thing, as I mentioned, is increasing the reach of digital financial solutions, which can skip a lot of the steps in accessing the kinds of populations that we work with. And I think the next slide is the last one, but we have a lot of partnerships. We're working with the German government, with an Asian group that's working on financial services, with CABFIN, which you probably are aware of, to sort of, as I mentioned, generate knowledge, create momentum, and heighten the impact of financing. We contribute to the financing for development discussions at the United Nations level. And we spend a lot of time working with stakeholders, small community organizations and individuals on strengthening their financial capacities. We also work at the country level to pilot instruments. So we've been talking a lot about insurance instruments recently, and on sort of helping to channel this sort of green finance to agri-food systems. I think that's it for me. I hope I've kept to time. But I really appreciate the invitation, and I hope that that wasn't too far off what you've been discussing and generates some questions or interest that I can answer for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. That was very inspiring. And it's always impressive what FAO is doing in the field. So I would like to know if there's any question from the audience.
Hi, Lauren, Denise Voss here, Chairwoman of LuxFLAG. Thank you very much for presenting. I'm assuming COVID hasn't made things any easier in terms of the numbers there. And I just wondered as well, I mean, in terms of just getting, as you say, the money to where it needs to go to. I mean, I certainly understand that blended finance is a way and a hopefully growing way. Is that something that you're seeing more, you know, where governments or I guess other agencies are taking the first risk to encourage private investors to invest in these kinds of perhaps, well, more risky projects?
Thanks, Denise. That's a great question. So let me tackle the first part first that you mentioned, COVID. So COVID has made all of the trends that I've given you, well, I haven't told you a lot about poverty, but those trends and the exclusion have become much more effective. So COVID has had a dramatic effect on the number of people who are living in poverty, the number of people who are experiencing insecurity in their food, and also in the gap between men and women. So more women are now food insecure than men by a large and increasing margin. More women are falling into poverty, more women have lost jobs than men. So there's been these uneven effects of COVID as well. So that just to mention that. And then I know, how do we get money where it needs to go, which is really, I think, the million-dollar question, right? Like, how do we break that gap that I said on the 1.7% that gets down to the poorest? I think that I'm aware of a lot of blended finance and first loss capital facilities that are trying to get down to this missing middle, really to look at the smallest players. So still looking at, viable businesses, small viable businesses, and trying to identify a pipeline of investments. I know about a fund called the ABC Fund, which is with, I think, working with Luxembourg, but also working with the European Commission and EFAD, which is another one of our sister agencies in the United Nations system. And those kinds of things, right, where a fund is using public resources to offset the risk of investing in very small businesses that don't necessarily have a good track record of profitability. So I think that, a seed of public capital can be useful to encourage engagement on the part of the private financial sector in smallholder ag. And basically, as financial actors, maybe that seed money is just enough to get you across the barrier, right? To see that it's a viable business to invest in and that there is a track record for success, which can be inclusive and sustainable.
Thanks, Lauren. And I guess, blended finance obviously is something that's been developing over the years. So hopefully more and more private investors are getting comfortable with the model. That's obviously what we need to start getting some traction and more of them to put more to work, if you will. So
absolutely.
And
to move it down.
I'm optimistic and I hope that's a good thing. I hope that's actually realistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Lorraine. Any other question?
Great.
No? Okay. So thank you so much, Lorraine. And FAO is, of course, we started the LSIW event on the 17th of October, which is the International Day of the Eradication of Poverty, and FAO is the United Nations organization in charge, if I can say so, of that day. So this is why we also we're really keen to invite you for that closing and for your presentation. So thank you so much. I'm sure we will meet in person soon, probably in Luxembourg, and participants will have the opportunity to have maybe another presentation from you. I would like again to thank Laura and Shaneera for being with us and for your insightful also presentation regarding also what CSSF is looking forward. And I'm sure we all have to change somehow our mind and start to think about sustainability by design. So I would like now to thank also, of course, all our speakers, our participants, partners hosting the sessions, media partners, and charter member, of course. And I would like especially to welcome also the LuxFLAG team on stage. But they deserve a very special applause for making that event a success. So please join me in. So this is only part of the team, but it's well represented, and as you can see, we are quite diverse. we are working really on the gender balance, but for now we are well represented in terms of nationalities, linguistic capabilities, and everyone is so much more, but we will not disclose here, for sure. And of course, I would like also to especially thank Denise Voss, the chairwoman of LuxFLAG. Without her, nothing will have be possible also. So thank you so much. I wish you a great day and yeah, a great evening. Yeah, stay tuned for next year edition, the 5th edition. Yeah, we will also look forward to make you some surprises and to stay tuned on where we stand on sustainable finance. Thank you. Bye-bye. Merci à vous.
Yes, the one. All kinds of washing. And we talk about the gender